Okay, we want to get started. Can everybody hear me? Is the mic on?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, thank all of you for coming to this meeting. You have before you 4 of the 6 members of the Bylaws Committee. The individuals who are not here at this session are Tom Gallagher, who is traveling, and Reverend Lytle, who is also traveling. But believe me, they both have been active participants in the 9-month effort we have put together as a committee to review all of the bylaws and to come up with what we believe are good changes to our bylaws and the way we operate. So the purpose of this meeting is to answer questions that you might have about any of these proposed changes. I realize you may not have had a lot of time to go through this, although they have been posted on the website, and you may have received your formal packets either last Sunday, because some were passed out, or today. So we want to take just a couple of minutes before we start to entertain your questions. I might say at the start that the process that the committee used was literally from the beginning of the bylaws to the end. We took each article and each section as they were normally constituted in the current bylaws. And we have made extensive review of both worldwide ministries, recommended bylaws formats, as well as what I believe a comprehensive review of state law to ensure that we were in compliance with all requirements of nonprofits by the state of Hawaii. So we hope that we have accomplished that purpose in our review. Each of us is going to just make a couple of comments about their participation. I have previously been involved in bylaws revisions many years ago, and I'm currently serving both on the Bylaws Committee, this particular Bylaws Committee, and the committee that worked on the Endowment Fund proposal, which you also have in your packets. So I'm very familiar with bylaws. I've worked with them for many years, and it's been a pleasure to be a part of the group to take on this important task. So I'm going to pass the mic over to Richard.
Oh, thank you, Jack. Just introducing myself, I'm Richard Hughes. I'm a board member. I've been a board member for about 1 year and 3 months or so, and filling in on someone's term. And also, we did have 6 members for this committee. Today, Thomas Gallagher, as Jack was mentioning, is traveling, and Reverend Tim, of course, is off island and traveling. In fact, I think he's due back tomorrow. I would like to personally thank everybody that sent in emails to the Bylaws Committee and who participated in this process. It was very helpful. I would certainly appreciate it. And we did have a gallery, some individuals that did show up, most notably Kathy Whitmire, Joanne Adams, Jan Fitzgerald was involved also. Catherine Burton also was quite involved. And Linda Wong did show up too. But their attendance, I think, was immeasurable, and it really helped out. It was a free-form discussion. We went back and forth. We did not always agree on everything. Each one of us probably got outvoted at least once, but that's how it works. But it was a very wonderful committee experience, and I really appreciate everything that people have done here on that committee. Debbie, especially as secretary. She's secretary on this committee as well as secretary on the board of directors. And when we finish with the bylaws, we're now going to have an assistant secretary in the bylaws. That's advocated. It's a suggestion. So it is a good amount of work that went into this. But no matter what the amount of work that went into it. The really important thing is that everybody give it their critical eye, take a look at it, and really decide, is this in the best interest of the church or not? Okay. So far, we've had pretty good feedback, and a lot of what's on the ballot is you can vote individually. So it's not like one up or down vote at all. So anyway, with that, I'll turn the mic over to Howard for his comments, and then we'll move on.
Thank you, Richard. Name is Howard Wigg. I used to be board president many, many years ago. I was going to say when most of you were in the sandbox, but that might not be the case. And we revised the bylaws at that time, and thereafter after leaving the presidency, I was pretty well inactive from an insider's standpoint, just a devoted attendee and donor. So I come to this with a pair of fresh eyes. I've not been with my boots on the ground. I don't know about all the excitement we've had for the last couple of years. And also in my profession, I'm a building code professional, and I review laws at the national, state, county level. I write the laws, and then I interpret the laws. So that's my law background, in addition to being previously with the Bylaws Committee many, many years ago. Thank you. Debbie?
Hi, I'm Debbie Catania, and board secretary and the secretary for this Bylaws Committee. This Bylaws Committee, as well as the board activity, is my first dive into this kind of work for the church, and it's been a huge learning curve for me, but also very enjoyable. I believe rewarding, being able to work with the caliber of people that we have to work with. And so hopefully, we're able to answer all your questions. If not, we will be able to look up the answers and figure that out. And thank you for your attendance.
I'd like to suggest a little protocol for how we might approach this. You see, we have a microphone up there. This session is being recorded so that you will be able, and other members will be able to review it if they so desire. In thinking about how we might progress rather than just open up the floor, since you have a copy of your proposed bylaws, it is a red-line copy, so that clearly should show you what was added and what was deleted. So we've given both the original text crossed out as well as an indication of the replacement language in that particular section of the document. So as a suggestion, I might just call for any questions as we proceed through the various articles. We'll do it the same way we kind of approached it. If there are no questions about that article, then we'll move on to the next one, and perhaps we can call out which articles we're on. As I think your notes indicated, our intention here is not to debate what it is we came up with. We're not open to new proposals or counter suggestions. We have had and given you ample opportunity, I think, to voice your opinions, and all opinions have been carefully considered. So our intention here is to make sure you have clarity on what it is we're proposing, and perhaps, as appropriate, the rationale that we came up with to make that particular change. So if that's a sufficient explanation to get started, perhaps we can, if you'll turn to your bylaws, Article 1, called Identification. And if any of you would like to address a question about any of the very minor changes which occurred in that article, invite you to step up to the microphone. If not, we will move on article by article. Any questions or comments on Article 1, which is Section 101, Statement of Purpose and Mission, as well as Section 2.01, Principal Office, and Section 2. I'm sorry, that's Article 2 already. Article 1 simply deals with the statement of purpose, which we changed purpose to mission. Any questions or clarities? Hearing none. Oh, we do have one. I'm sorry.
A point of accuracy is you list Unity School of Christianity and Unity Worldwide Ministries. The legal name of the organization is still Association of Unity Churches, DBA, Unity Worldwide Ministries.
Okay.
You might want to, and I'm not certain about Unity School of Christianity, if that's still the legal name of that entity. I think it has changed as well. You may want to check that with the organizations before final publication.
We'll make notes of any errors or any comments such as what Margie just made. Thank you, Margie. Okay, Article 2 is office records. 2 sections, the principal office, where we conduct business, and Section 2.02, official records and the handling thereof. You might note that there is a reference in there to Appendix A, in which we have made considerable effort to define exactly what official records are and who may access those. Any questions or clarifications on Article 2?
I think when I read Exhibit A, it did not answer this question. I'm not entirely sure how broad personnel records are. In other words, does it include the resume that the person filed for the job? Does it include any transcripts or whatever that they may have provided to prove that whatever is on their resume is true? You know, that sort of thing. Because personnel records could be extremely broad. And so I was just wanting to see what was the vision of this change by using such a broad term as personnel records.
I will try to speak to that. Perhaps others may wish to speak to it as well. I think there are some provisions, Joanne, in terms of access to, for example, ministerial records during the process of hiring and those types of things. As a former HR executive, personnel records normally refers to their personal information. It refers to their compensation. It may refer to any performance reviews or things of that nature. Things like job descriptions or summaries of background and experience. I don't know that the committee discussed the inclusion or exclusion specifically of something like that, but I would believe that certain things such as resumes would be open and not part of personnel records. However, we don't specify that.
So then, basically, because it says personnel records, unless there is some change to exclude things like resumes, then they would be covered and not be available to the membership the way it's currently defined.
I would
Correct.
concur, yes.
Yeah. Okay, then the second one, and this may be answered in later articles. There is no, it's quite explicit that members cannot have access to personal identifying information, which would include addresses and email addresses, I'm assuming. How then, if the membership wants to call, and if this is addressed later, we can just defer it. if they wanted to call a special membership meeting or to contact the members in order to say, I think there's a need for a special membership meeting, how is it envisioned that a group of members can contact the membership as a whole? Because in the current bylaws, I believe, that all happens through the board or the minister. I know for sure the board, and I think the minister, and it sort of leaves off the possibility that the members themselves could call for a meeting and be able to contact the other members. So I'm just wondering how that will be addressed, and if it will be addressed that the memberships will ask for a meeting and then the staff or whomever will take care of the mailing, that's fine, but I just want to make sure that we know what we're doing when we don't allow them to get access to addresses, phone numbers, and email addresses.
I don't know if anyone wants to comment on that.
Okay, if you go to section 305, meetings and quorums, you've got paragraphs A, B, and C. Right near the bottom of paragraph B, there's a list of how you can call a special meeting there. And if the members want to call a special meeting, a written request must be submitted to the Board of Trustees after they have gotten the requisite number of signatures for that. And the board will act to put out the notification. This is the way that I do read that section there.
Any other questions on Article 2, Section 2.01, or Section 2.02? If not, we'll move to Article 3, membership. This has quite a few subheadings, subsections, so I think we'll probably take those one at a time in terms of inquiring. Section 3.01 is called qualifications. Any questions about qualifications? You can see on your copy of the bylaws what was changed in that particular section.
I assume, I just want to make sure that what I'm trying to do is point out, as you can tell, the ramifications of the changes that are being suggested.
Sure.
In 3.02, the last sentence of the first paragraph, you have struck out the one that says members below the age of 18 are not eligible to vote. So I'm assuming with that strikeout that members under age 18 will be eligible to vote.
I think the answer to that, there was a topic of considerable discussion. In order to become a member of this church, you're required to go through standard membership classes. And if you complete those tasks and sign the covenant that's required of all members, age is not a determinant in accordance with the way we have stated this as to voting membership. So I think the answer to your question is yes, we have struck that out so that individuals under the age of 18 meeting the other qualifications of membership would be considered voting members.
Okay. So then I would just like to advise members that persons under 18, there are serious legal considerations for people under 18 because they can void contracts, which a covenant is a contract. So that's all I wanted to point out on that. Now, I also wanted to make sure that I understand if you slip into, you have not reinstated within 2 years, am I reading this correctly that you then have to start all over, including the membership classes? Is that the correct reading?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
So Joanne skipped ahead to membership 3.02. let me require or request again that if any questions, other questions about membership 3.02, that give you a chance to raise those questions. 3.02 did deal with the categories of members, voting membership, and reinstatement to voting membership. We have changed the reinstatement requirements, as you may read there. Normally, if you don't sign your annual covenant, you can be reinstated after a year by simply resubmitting it. However, if you are absent for 2 years, there is a more rigorous process to reinstate your membership. The covenant remains an annual requirement of all members to sign and complete that by the appointed date, which I believe is now the end of the year.
One point that I'd like to very carefully point out here is that if someone does not register, they're not becoming a non-member. You are a non-voting member, okay? So this is a big change. Before you missed it, you're out. You're no longer a member. So if this passes as suggested, what it entails is if someone does not register, they're not out of the church. They're still a member of the church. They do lose the right to vote, though. And to renew their voting membership requires them to go through. If I understood that correctly? Yeah, okay. So I just want to be very careful to point that out. That is a major change in our bylaws, and it entailed that. Thank you.
Back in my day, way back when the membership question came up and the voting question came up, there was a lot of discussion about who was eligible, who was not eligible. And as you can see from all the underlines here, we went through a lot of vigorous discussion on this issue. And this is our consensus.
Okay, section 3.03, terms of membership. I think we've kind of covered that, but Joanne?
But of course I have a question. I see that B, removal, is struck. Does that mean that the members can no longer remove anybody, or is it moved to some other section?
Yes, a member can remove himself,
Mm-hmm.
And that's about it.
But the membership cannot remove a member.
Correct.
Frankly, I love that. But anyway, I just want to make sure that's pointed out. Thank you.
Okay, moving to 3.04, rights of voting members. These are all of the specific rights that voting members have at this church, what they're allowed to do. You may note one change that we discussed at some length about changing the amount of money that a congregant member needs to vote on if there is an expenditure that exceeds a certain amount. Because of the changes in the cost of things and so on, we increased the amount that needed to be taken to membership for voting from $25,000 to $100,000.
And we also removed the word virtually present at meetings and substituted electronically present. Millennials barely know what physical presence is and what these mysterious pieces of thing are. So we're keeping up with the electronic times.
I'm assuming that this is an error that needs to be corrected. So D, 3.04D. vote at any annual meeting or special meeting of the membership must vote on any question. I think that in another section you struck out one of those phrases. So there's a little redundancy.
Can you refer?
Fix the grammar incorrect. Sorry.
Can you refer to that again, Jan? What article? What
Section D. So
Section
it
D
used to say at any annual or special meeting, the membership must vote. Now it says vote at any annual membership, the membership must vote. And so that's there's another section where there was a similar change in wording, and you struck out the second the membership must vote. So you probably intended to do that, but it's still there. That's all.
Did you get that? Thank you. Okay, the next section is section 3.05, meetings and quorum. We dealt with substantially with the notice for meetings. We expanded the mailing to other forms of communication, partly for cost purposes, because mailings to everyone of notices can become very expensive, so we adopted language from other sources as to what was appropriate for communication of notices.
In 304, also in D through the end, there are varying levels for the percentage of affirmative vote. And you changed 1 down to 2/3, but you did not change G. That is still at 75%. Was that discussed and decided to keep it at 75%, or was it just sort of glossed over because the others are now all down to the 2/3?
I think the answer to that is it was discussed, and we decided, again, because of the increased expense, to keep it at 75% as a requirement, where we did change some of the other ones from 75% to 2/3. I don't think it was an oversight, is what I'm saying. Anything further on meetings and quorum, section 3.05?
Before I get out my pom-poms, because I think this is a terrific, under waiver of notice, does that mean that we would now have the option of saying, please notify me electronically, and everything that is now being mailed would be emailed? Is that what that means?
Anyone want to take that question? I'm not sure I know how to answer that.
So, Joanne, can you hit me with your question again, please?
In section C and D, it looks as if there is now the option to say, please email me rather than mail me, which would save tremendous amounts of postage. Right. Am I reading that correctly?
Yes, there's multiple ways of receiving notice.
Okay. I will now get out my pom-poms.
And that's C, but you had a point in waiver of notice also. Was there something in there that caught
was
your eye?
The same thing, that you could waive notice in writing and then receive it electronically. It's all basically the same thing. We can do things electronically now rather than by mail.
All right. That's recognition of that waiver and adhering to the process of electronic notification. Okay, thank you.
Okay, if nothing further, we'll move to Article 4, Government. Again, this is probably the most extensive article in the bylaws, so I will go through it one by one. Section 4.1, Administration. I don't believe there are any changes there. 4.02, relative to ministers. We did review and revised in some cases the duties of the minister and who may be a senior minister. We did leave in there the dispensation that was possible to obtain a minister that did not have specific unity ministerial credentials if dispensation was provided by Worldwide Ministries. The duties, as I say, are enumerated there. I think there were only minor changes in the minister's duties.
So in the minister's duties, there was actually one item that we kind of went around a little bit on, and that is item E. So 402.2E. And this is actually at the request of Reverend Tim, that a minister serve as an ex officio member of all board committees. And that's board committees, as differentiated between ministry committees. So our bylaws are already consistent with, existing with, serve as ex officio member of all ministry teams. So the minister sets the teams up. The board establishes the committees. So what this change does is it allows the minister to be on all board committees. And there's two sides of the coin, and I think Joanne was involved in that discussion. And if it's a good time, I'll pass the mic over to Joanne.
Okay, the problem that I see with that addition is the word all. Clearly, the minister would not serve as an ex officio member on his own evaluation. And so that's an evaluation committee. And second of all, it seems very unlikely, but it's possible, I'm not sure it's advisable, that the current minister would serve on a search team committee to select the next minister.
I believe he is excluded from his own evaluation or serving as a member of a new committee. Of course, he would no longer be here if we were having a search committee requirement for a new minister.
Not necessarily. If it were a planned retirement, for example,
I see.
He could say, I'm intending to retire 2 years from now, and I want to serve on the search committee to select my replacement.
Of course, this option which we're giving to him is simply that. It is an option that he may or may not serve.
It says shall.
He says, it does say serve as an ex officio. Ex officio means, carries the sense of being allowed to attend all such meetings, not necessarily carrying a voting responsibility.
Well, ex officio can be either voting or non-voting, but it means that you shall serve, because the language above says shall, that they shall serve by right of the office that they hold, which in this case is the senior minister. So the senior minister would be able to serve by the right of the fact that he's an ex officio, by the fact that he is the senior minister on all board committees.
Are you looking at section 4.02? Because I don't see the word shall.
In the sentence above, on the previous page, as administrative director, the senior minister shall, colon. So all of these are shalls.
Okay, shall. I got you. Thank you.
Thanks, Joanne. I think those are two very good points in the area of evaluation and search team committee. And I do agree with the reading shall means this places the minister on all committees. So it looks like we may need to tweak that.
Okay.
One thing to think about in discussing this is the issue of the amount of influence. And this was one side of the issue. Previously, it appeared to have been separated, although this does place the minister in any committee. Now, we don't write bylaws based on personalities. I mean, I would vote Reverend Tim onto every committee we've got.
Okay.
But on the other hand, think of some unknown future minister. So we're writing bylaws for our children's children. And this is the governance of the church. So we really need to be clear about this. When I first got onto the board about a year and 3 months ago, we did get some training by Reverend Tony Bain, and she indicated that there's three ways churches operate. One is minister-centric, one is community-centric, and the third way is mission-centric. Now, mission-centric is the goal. So you got to be very careful because of the level of influence that being on every committee might present, okay? So that's just my caution in that area. And I was kind of sitting on the fence and kind of going back and forth a little bit. But that's the other side of the coin, something to think about. So if you think about it that way, just pick the worst person in your life that you'd like to see as minister and put them on every committee, okay, as opposed to the board voting them onto every committee. Mm-hmm. So that's a standalone item. Mm-hmm. And again, I would certainly vote Reverend Tim onto every one of these committees. But we're writing stuff for the future. But there
could be the scenario where we've decided to get rid of a minister, and now he's still, or she is still on every committee. Yeah.
Okay, and the question is writing the bylaws, not on personalities,
right,
but on what's good governance for the church.
Right.
So we all have to take a look at that and decide on that one.
And then I'm not sure what is the meaning of the entire licensed unity ministers and teachers being struck out. I don't think I was sitting in on the meetings at this point, so I just don't know. Does that appear someplace else? Was it considered duplicative? But to have the entire section on licensed unity ministers and teachers disappear, I just wasn't sure what that meant.
If anybody wants to comment on that, I think what we did was we put that under the purview of the minister staff, and that the bylaws should not necessarily indicate that licensed unity ministers and teachers had to have focus in one of those four areas that was previously in there. The duties and compensation, we didn't feel was necessary to cover those under a separate category. It's not that we're trying to disallow them, but we're simply saying these particular provisions are not necessarily required. Sometimes you don't have any licensed unity ministers or teachers. So we just did not find it relevant, I guess.
Yeah, now that we're discussing it, that is exactly my recollection also. We did spend a lot of time on this issue.
Any further comments or?
I'm trying to scan. Is the topic of oversight of licensed unity teachers dealt with under duties and responsibilities of the senior minister?
I believe so.
Okay. Point of clarity, licensed unity teachers do have to declare training in what is now one of 5 categories, but since we're striking all of that, that's not pertinent to this document. Thank you.
One other comment that I would make, may not be quite to that section, but one of the questions we spent quite a bit of time debating was whether or not a licensed unity teacher could be a member of the board. And there was quite a bit of research that we did on that. What the bylaws do stipulate, and I don't recall the specific section, is that if licensed unity teachers are no longer active memberships by the submission of an annual report which they must submit, they would be eligible for running for the board under those conditions only. Because of course no one can run for the board if they receive any form of compensation, with the exception of the senior minister.
So this area, as Howard just pointed out, we went around on this quite a bit. There's a lot of moving parts to it, and I think the conversation even took place last August or July. Reverend Tim was involved in this conversation. Now, we've got one meeting today on these bylaws, and Reverend Tim will be back by I think tomorrow. So he should be sitting up here for the next bylaws rollout meeting. So he was very helpful in helping us talk through this. So we may want to defer that until he arrives, and I'm sure he could speak to it also.
Okay, next section, if there are no further comments on that section, 4.03, Board of Trustees members. This section covers the structure, duties, of Board of Trustees members. You'll see quite a bit of red, or I guess underlining, since I don't think you have red copies like we do. But we did have a lot of discussion about whether we should increase or decrease the number of trustees on the board. After some discussion, we elected to keep it at the same number, 9 elected members plus the senior minister. We did elect to continue the process of trustees not being able to serve any more than 2 consecutive terms. But there was a significant change in that as it relates to the appointment of a interim director because of a resignation or removal of a current member of the board. Is that in this section, Richard, or is that in a different section? I don't recall. It's tied into it. So one important change you might be aware of that pretty much got universal approval was in the case of a removal or resignation of a board member, the board will appoint an interim director only for the year in which that director, the current year in which that director resigned. It's not going to be from that point to the end of that director's term, which could be for as long as 3 years. So they will serve as a smaller period of time, and as soon as the annual election reoccurs, the congregation will again be able to elect a member of the board, albeit with a more limited term of service. So for example, if they quit the first year, there would be an election of a board member for 2 years at the next annual meeting. Any comments or? Jan, please.
I'm sorry I left my marked up copy at home. So I'm kind of trying to find the things as we go. Under the number 3, individuals ineligible for board service. The first one says any individual receiving compensation from the minister, and I think you meant ministry. So, but that would be an important distinction.
Can you what number is that? Under 4.03, under number 3, okay?
3 and 1, yeah. And then one of the differences between what you have currently and what was there previously was that a spouse, parent, child, or significant other of a person receiving compensation used to be not allowed to be a board member, and you didn't put that in this time, and I wanted to make sure that was intentional and not an oversight.
I believe that the previous statement, spouse, parent, child, or significant other of a serving trustee would apply whether they were receiving compensation or not.
No, what I'm saying is, in the crossed out part, it says, among the people not eligible, individual, this is at the top of the next page, page 7, individual receiving compensation from the ministry or the spouse, parent, child, or significant other of an individual receiving compensation from the ministry. And that is not included in the current version, right? You've continued a spouse, parent, child, or a significant other of a serving trustee, but left out employees, someone receiving compensation. So I'm just asking if you did that on purpose.
Okay, so there's a compensation issue and then there's a significant other issue. Okay, the way...
No, the significant other or child, parent, whatever, of a serving board member, of a person receiving compensation, so an employee of the church. Did you mean to leave those guys?
I'm trying to get a handle on the components of this. So
what I'm saying is that as it stands now, if the spouse of an employee of the church wanted to run for the board, they could. They could.
Could?
Yeah. Is that what you wanted?
That's eliminated. A spouse, parent, child, or significant other of a serving trustee. They may not, they're not qualified.
Right.
Is that what we're saying? Of an employee. Oh, of an employee.
Right. So that used to be excluded. It's not excluded now. I wanted to just make sure that was intentional. And then we can decide whether that should be in there or not.
Okay, so when you reference the exclusion, can you help me out with the citation on that? It should be right there.
So at the top of the next page, it says, person receiving compensation from the ministry or the spouse, parent, child, or significant other of an individual receiving compensation.
Okay, I see what you're writing.
And it's not been...
Okay.
So it's not in there.
Right. No, that's a good point. Thank you for making that point. So, Debbie, we got that down in the notes there? Okay. All right, thank you.
I don't know that was a deliberate omission. It may have been an inadvertent one. And I don't know whether we've debated as a committee the pros and cons of that particular aspect. And we're not going to do that in this forum. Okay, but thank you. All right, so moving forward, we're still in 403, yes.
403 D, vacancy number 1. I just want to throw out a major hooray for the inclusion that if we have a vacancy again, please not soon, that we will not only notify UW and we will begin securing an interim minister. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we were very clear on the fact that unlike the current situation where we were without a interim minister for a long period of time, that is now specifically called for immediately. We will not allow for an absence in our senior minister for any inappropriate time period. Any other questions on section 4.03? Section 4.04, the Board of Trustees election. I'm sorry? Okay, duties. Let me back up. I guess I was just covering the structure, and now any questions on the duties? One thing I would like to call to the group's attention is the actual number one duty, which I think is an overriding duty, which is to establish policy. Policy has a very specific set of parameters associated with it, and be responsible for the fiscal well-being of the ministry. So personally, I think the board has on occasion delved beyond what I would normally consider policy and the fiscal well-being of the church, so that I think the committee felt that we wanted to make clear that there are certainly different kinds of boards that have different types of roles and responsibilities, but we felt quite strongly that this is a policy-making board, and that other than the fiscal responsibility, which they do carry a lot of weight for, that policy should be their primary focus when discussing matters. Certainly, we want to emphasize the assurance that accounting records are current and properly maintained, since that's been a very sore point for many years with this church, following, I think, Sky's demise and subsequent period in which we were, I think, not functioning in accordance with all of these bylaws requirements. It certainly was there before, and we want to make sure it's emphasized and is being taken care of. We also wanted to point out item number 11, to adopt an annual income and expense budget and monitoring of that, which implies the availability of current accounting records. Did you have anything else, Margie, on duties?
Do the bylaws deal with an issue of non-performance of duties on the part of a particular board member?
Yes,
Thank you.
It does. And we'll cover that when we get to it. I would also call your attention to item number 3, positively support and respect the role of the senior minister. We had quite a bit of discussion about the handling of interactions between members and the board and the senior minister, both currently and in the past. We know that's been a source of a great deal of contention, and we wanted to specifically make a positive statement in these bylaws that it is expected that all members of the Board of Trustees, as well as all members of the community, but since this deals with the board members, that that is adhered to.
And in virtually all sections, if we felt there might be interaction with the Hawaii revised statutes regarding nonprofit institutions, we carefully cross-checked and inserted any provisions that were required by state law.
Okay, moving forward then, if there are no other further questions. 4.04, Board of Trustees election. We did make quite a few changes in the nominating process, which you may want to review carefully. Basically, we undertook to modify the mechanism by which self-nomination or nomination by members of other members outside of the nominating committee could be handled in a better form. As you know, and with this current annual meeting, members can be submitted for election from the congregation. And while there's usually a statement of participation by that prospective new board candidate, it precluded some of the normal process that we would like to see followed for consideration of that candidate by the nominating committee, which means basically we need to make sure, as you will see there, that we have the nominating committee has ensured that they meet the membership requirement as well as the attendance of unity classes so that they're conversant with unity principles. So we back that up. We can't do it. If you want to nominate from the congregation, there's a process by doing it. You've got to do it more in advance, and that's stipulated in how we're going to carry that out.
There's only one ramification that I would like to point out, and that is on the nominating committee, you say that they should have at least 2 candidates for each vacancy. I believe, I'm not saying that isn't healthy. What I'm saying is, with this new structure, where anyone who is appointed will then be elected at the next annual meeting, it could easily be that we could have 4 to 6 openings, which means we have to have 8 to 12 candidates. So I'm just pointing that out in terms of ramification. I'm not saying it's bad or good. I'm just saying it could be really onerous on the nominating committee.
We thank you, Joanne. We did discuss that, and I think we modified our language slightly to say shall seek rather than as a requirement. Obviously, I think for any position, at least 2 candidates for an open position should always be the norm. It's always a struggle, and it is true that with the new change in procedure about a resignation and a subsequent election of a board member who resigned, it could be that an annual meeting we could elect up to 6 board members, most likely 4, assuming there's only 1 resignation during a particular year. But it does place a little additional burden, as is pointed out, on the nominating committee or on self-nomination. We've opened that up. We've also made as a requirement, as soon as you're a member of this church, you do not have to wait a year in membership in order to qualify to be a board member. So we have expanded that particular aspect to try to address the question of the desirability of more candidates per position and maybe more positions on an annual basis than just 3.
So I understand it has been a struggle in the past, and Joanne, you've been very much involved with nominations and active in that area, and your attendance in our meetings is very appreciated. 2 candidates might sound like a stretch now, but being an optimist, I'm looking forward to the day when people are just dying to serve on the board. And we'll just have to whittle them down to just 2, or nah, not really. But so we're looking forward to some beautiful changes in the future.
And one of the things with the way this is set up, right now we're sort of unaware of how long a person's term is, and we as congregants will now have to be very aware of how long each term is. And I know I have been told, and I suspect there are many others, that would be eager to run if they thought they only had to serve a year. So it may be that we will get more candidates to run if there are some positions that are less than 3 years. It may end up being a wash, so it could be great.
Yeah, that is definitely, I see also as an advantage. Because if a board member doesn't complete his term, vacates his position, the next annual membership meeting, the congregation votes a new board member into that position. So at the time of the election, we're not quite down to that yet in the bylaws here, but it's been handled. We'll be reviewing it. But basically, when the election happens, you may have 5 positions that are being filled, or maybe 4. So the candidates who have the highest votes, they get to choose sequentially as to what term length they want. And they get to choose. And some of them, as I do totally agree with, may want to just do a short term and be helpful at a certain time during the church's history. So this really opens that up for that kind of service.
unfortunately, when you go in, you don't know whether you're going to get the most votes or not. So it still raises the question. But nevertheless, we did consider discussing variable terms, not 3 years, maybe have some 1 year, 2 years. That was an active discussion. I appreciate, in my own sense, in talking with numbers of people about being on the board, that was a consideration for some of them. We did not reach a consensus that we found a mechanism to change that at the present time, but perhaps that could be an open question for the next time we do this.
But continuing it with not knowing if you're going to run for the board, I would highly expect people to probably run around to the other candidates and go, what kind of term are you looking for? Before they really throw their name in the hat or not. That may happen.
I say, once upon a time, you stood in line waiting to be a member of the board. In other words, there were so many people, you had to pay your dues and work your way up. So maybe we'll get there again.
I hope so. That would be wonderful. Let's see, I'm not sure whether we covered the congregational nominating procedure. We did talk about that a little bit. And then the election procedure at the annual meeting, as Rich briefly covered, as to how the candidates, once they're voted on, would get to select their terms of office. So let's move forward to section 4.05, vacancy and replacement. The first item is vacancy. There was a indication that we take the board attendance very seriously, and indicated that the removal of a trustee will be automatic should they fail to attend 3 successive meetings. Now, to counter that, there was no such thing as a excused absence, but there was a possibility that there could be participation via electronic means as an option for personally attending the meeting. So we tightened that down to some extent, but because the business of this church is so important every meeting, any board member that failed to meet that particular requirement, we felt the bylaws should indicate a vacancy would be required. Of course, the other important criteria for vacancy, besides a resignation or a death, would be for failure of a trustee to fulfill the duties of the office as specified in Article 4, Section .03, which we've already covered. So those duties are all being held to a high standard, and I believe that kind of constraints on board membership can be placed either by other board members, the minister, or congregants who feel that those duties are not being properly followed. In the case of an actual vacancy or a discussion for removal, of course, membership would have a right to initiate a special meeting for that purpose.
I know you guys have this memorized better than I do, so I'm just asking because I can't flip and find it fast enough. It used to be, under the current bylaws, that you could not appoint someone who had served within the last year. Is that still going to be true with this annual election process? Or could someone, I'm just thinking of this scenario, they missed 3 meetings, they were the vacancy occurred, will they be eligible to run at the next annual meeting, or is that going to preclude them from being? In other words, will the congregation decide at that point yes or no on the 3 successive meetings, or will they be precluded from running at the next annual meeting, and it required me looking into too many places to figure out the answer to that.
I believe the answer is they're still precluded. That is, they could not have to leave the board because of the vacancy, failure to contribute, attend the meetings properly, and they would be precluded from running that next year. But they could run the year after. Does anybody have a different perspective on the committee? So to answer your question, they would be precluded, Joanne. Okay, moving forward, where are we? I lose track. No, we're on 406.
State 405A, number 4. Wait, maybe I may be wrong. Hang on, I may have spoken. Oh, I misspoke. I was confusing it with 3. The board cannot remove a trustee who's been elected by the people, but the membership can. I misspoke, sorry.
Yes, that's correct. Okay, Margie has a comment.
On the question of removal of a board member by the membership, I'm not seeing where that removal process is defined specifically. Like currently, I believe our bylaws require a certain percentage of vote. Am I just not finding it in, the flip and try to locate?
It should be that you're not finding it.
Okay. So the mechanism is specifically identified in this current version.
I'm like you, I'm looking for it, but I believe it is there.
So one pertinent point is 4.05 under vacancy A. The new 4.3 is the membership voting for removal of a trustee because of his or her failure to fulfill the duties of the office as specified in the article, yada, yada.
Yes.
Okay, then I didn't see this specified in that article. I'll look more closely.
Okay.
It refers to Article 304H, but 304H is just limited to vote for the removal of any or all trustees must be in accordance with 40584. So it's a very minimal pointing to each other saying, yes, you can remove. It does say 2/3. Yes. But it does not really elaborate like whether it has to be a special membership meeting and so on and so forth.
Really clear.
Okay, part of this process is compliance with state laws. So in the process of reviewing a lot of these bylaws or suggestions here, we did go in and look at state laws. So we were reluctant to actually put a lot of the state law language in our bylaws because state law could change. So we are still, there is that one little line in there that it has to conform to state law. So that's in the bylaws. So that process, the logistics of how to, we wrote some language, or some language was already present, and that was the voting and the percentage. But we still have to comply with whatever the state law may be.
Okay, I think we're on section 4.06, meetings and quorum. First part is regular board meetings, and we added some language that regular meetings cannot be changed except for the December meeting, and that's partly to make sure that congregants are aware of those meetings and of course are always welcome to attend those meetings. So the board can't inadvertently say, no, let's not meet this week, let's meet next week, and the congregant members would not have an opportunity to be present. So that was part of the reason for that language.
Again, I just want to, this is a ramification note on 4.06. Before it said, you will be eliminated if you miss 3 regularly scheduled meetings. And I want to point out that a regular meeting means those that are scheduled each month. So like in November and December, where we seem to have ukazillion meetings, you would only be in trouble if you miss the regularly scheduled. I just want to make that sure. Make that sure that everybody's clear, because in the beginning of the year we set the calendar for the year. That's what you're obligated to.
Yes, yes, that's correct. Okay, item B under section 4.06 is special board meetings, and we did some clarification on agendas and executive sessions and what must be handled during the regular meetings, and coverage of executive sessions, what constitutes the board going into executive session, and what must be reported out of executive session. Again, trying to seek more transparency there. Even though executive session is, by its very nature, based on confidential the need for confidential communication and discussion. Certain results following that are reported in the minutes. Okay, moving forward, we want to try to keep moving. Section 4.07, Board of Trustees, officers. We spent a lot of time on the duties of the officers. And in addition to those reviews, and in some cases additions of responsibility, again, because of the scope and amount of work involved in both the secretary's job and the treasurer's job, we established an assistant secretary officer position as well as an assistant treasurer officer position. So out of the 9 members of the board, 6 would actually be constituted as officers, which sounds like a lot, but what it does is give those 2 positions, which are particularly time-consuming ones, the opportunity to delegate some of that, certainly get some help and support, as well as serving in the absence of those officers if required to do so. I realize it's a lot of stuff to read and try to keep on. Remember, you got another shot next week, so.
I see under President that you have eliminated nominated committees. Does that show up someplace else? Because right now the President nominates all those of the committees and then the board ratifies. Has that explicitly been stated somewhere else, or is it just sort of left up to the board?
It's been explicitly stated that any board member may suggest a committee to be formed. It's not only the President.
Terrific, thank you.
The approval is the same. Okay. That's under Section 5, Richard said. Okay, Section 4.08, it's expenditure of church funds. That section is in there only to the extent that there are provisions for use of church funds that are required in an amount of $5,000, or for, I think this is where we have social functions, if all church members are not invited. Church funds may not be authorized for social functions without the approval of the board for any meeting in which all church members are not invited. It's just an exclusionary provision. Section 4.09, gift acceptance policy. This is a brand new addition to these bylaws. That gift acceptance policy, did we attach it to this, Debbie, or I don't remember. So in your packet, there's an endowment. It's in there?
It's in the endowment.
Yeah. So in your packet, there's a separate set of bylaws for an endowment, the creation of an endowment fund, which you also will need to vote on. It's a brand new program that allows us to separate the giving that is designed for helping the church maintain its presence in perpetuity and gifts that are given for other reasons. So a gift acceptance policy which stipulates how that all will happen and how it will be decided where it goes is in this gift acceptance policy. Now, in these set of bylaws, it's included by reference. So if you want to read the gift acceptance policy, you'll need to get out your copy of the endowment fund bylaws, and it is present there. The gift acceptance policy will be the same for both sets of policies. And you cannot change one without changing the other in the future.
This substitutes for what used to be the Legacies of Aloha. We chose the new title to be much more explicit, and we wanted to make a very clear wall between the two entities, the gifted section policies and the bylaws.
I might just make a comment that we are actually creating a sub-entity which is provided by tax law, so that there will be a separate board of directors for the endowment fund, separate from the board of directors or trustees, as we call them, for the church itself. Now, those directors of the bylaws will be elected or appointed? I've forgotten. I think they're appointed by the Board of Trustees.
That one, appointed by the Board of Trustees.
Yeah, I think they are appointed by the Board of Trustees. Yes.
The term gift seems broad to me. Are you intending this to be gifts under the title of bequests, or is gift a legal term that has a specific definition in this usage?
I don't know that it is, but it's intended to be broad. And it's specifically defined in the gift acceptance policy, what that means.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This might be not important. I'm thinking of artwork. If someone were to donate a painting that was worth a few $1,000s, for example, would that, does that even come into this?
It is a possibility. If it's intended for the endowment fund, that artwork would normally be sold for its value. If it's intended to be given to the church, the board would decide whether to keep it or to sell it or how to dispose of it.
I see. Thank you.
Okay, moving forward, Board of Trustee committees. As was pointed out earlier, committees can be nominated by one or more board members. Exclusively before it was only the president. It's required that all board appointed committees have a minimum of one board member and of course be approved by the Board of Trustees. So that was one change we made in this committees. In addition, the Bylaws Committee felt that it was important to establish standing committees. These committees means that every board must establish these committees at the start of the year. They must place board members on them, and they must determine who else could be members of those committees. They do not have to be congregate members. They can be non-congregate members if it serves the board's purpose to do so. And I believe the committee chairmanships are decided by the committees once they're established. Is that correct? It's silent on that, I guess, other than we establish those.
In the beginning, you mentioned that you saw our board as a policy board, and I'm wondering now I'm just the titles, but some of these titles to me would indicate it would be difficult to stick with just policy. Facilities, for example, is that just policy about facilities? Because I know right now Thomas gets into the nitty-gritty of replacing gutters, and same with strategic planning. So what really are your thoughts there on the standing committees? Will these be limited to policy only, or might their hands get a little dirty with?
No, I think the committees are there for that very thing. They're there to deal with the specifics of what that committee is called upon to do or charged to do.
Okay.
Those committees will be defined, I believe, in a policy manual.
Okay.
So they are not.
So these committees may not be limited to policy only. They may
No.
do more. Okay, thank you.
What I'm really thinking about is the activities of the board during its meetings should be focused on policy. This committee thing is an important element because what I think our committee felt it provided for was to ensure that certain things that may have fallen by the wayside in previous boards or in conversions of boards or other things now are required to be addressed. Things like membership in particular, strategic planning, facilities, those are elements that have come and gone with their relative importance.
One of the aspects that we took a lot into consideration with regards to the committees are their standing requirements, the continuous need for, say, a facilities committee. We looked at, there's a need for the finance committee every year. The long-term need for these committees were addressed. And so, that's what we were looking at when we established the standing committees, is to look at, in long term, are these committees going to be beneficial? And I believe absolutely. If you look at the names of the committees and the requirements. So yes, the committees would get into the nitty-gritty of what those requirements are. However, the board itself is separate and works on policy. Does that clear it up?
And in looking at these, we had other proposals, and we decided that those other matters were of an interim basis, and they would be taken up as individual issues by the board.
On the question of policy, in my experience, codifying policy is the most interesting topic to follow, establish, and maintain in the life of a church. So you identify that the board is responsible for policy. I don't see language that says who's going to craft a policy manual. Am I missing it? Is that responsibility specifically called out somewhere in this document?
I think there's an intention to put together a policy manual, but I don't know that that policy and procedure manual is the way I would characterize that.
Okay.
But
would
in terms of policy for the board's requirements, I think it's more related to let's assign the responsibility for a question which we may have to the appropriate place, whether that be a committee, a staff member, the senior minister, and they are to report back to the board on whatever that requirement and subject. Example would be staffing of the church. The staffing of the church is the responsibility of the senior minister. So if there's an issue about staffing, job descriptions, requirements, whatever, the senior minister would be required to take that up and report back to the board. It's trying to keep the scope of the board's thinking on a broad, what's best for the church long-term, policy-wise, from an overall standpoint of governance, rather than how do we deal with fixing the eave troughs or any manifestation. That's why, in part, we assign these committees to take that up and not have to have the board involved. Now, Tom, if he's interested in facilities, he could be the board representative, and in that sense, he would have some operating responsibilities for the committee, but not as a board member, other than to report back.
Thank you.
I don't know if that answered your question, Margie. It's tough, I know. I've served on those boards.
I know this part of the bylaws might be a little confusing, especially the word policy. But it's these are laws, and then the board writes policies, okay? And the policies are not in the bylaws, okay? Because the bylaws are fairly permanent, and policies can change. But the board is, should this pass, the board is creating a law that a policy committee be established, as all these other committees be established. Now that committee can be largely church members and one board member. But the idea is that we look at our policies on a regular basis and see, like watchdogs, you know, is this working? Is this not working? Is this being followed? Is it not being followed? So that somebody is actually looking at this. So once, if this does become law, then the board's going to have to do this and have staff it and have people work on it. And then the policies, like the operations manual that Margie was just talking about, that would be a policy. Well, the policy committee doesn't make the policy. They take it to the board and say, hey, we've done our research, we'd really like to see this, and we've really talked about policy manuals and making sure they're accurate and kept up to date and are relevant to our operations. So that is an area of operational efficiency that we're highly aware of and are really advocating for. So not just policy, but strategic planning and other things and membership. So there's lots of work to do. These are working groups, these committees. And so we look forward to a bright future with a lot of help from people in the congregation to jump in there and just help out.
I think we're thinking about those as delegatable tasks with broadened participation. So much work falls to the board these days. If we can figure out a way to disseminate that, to move it into the congregation, to get their involvement and participation, I think we'll be much healthier as an organization.
And we made it very clear as we decided which committees to form that they had the freedom to reach outside of the Unity membership for expertise. For instance, fundraising is a very, very fine art. If you can get an outside fundraiser to come in voluntarily, that really adds to the strength of the committee.
Okay, moving forward, Article 6, dissolution. There's really no changes there. Oh, there should be.
There's a very entertaining typo in this paragraph. Did you catch it? No? Okay. About 3/4 of the way down, there's a parenthetical phrase, or the corresponding provision of any future United States Internal Revenue Code. I think you mean assets.
That was a Freudian slip.
Yes, it was identified.
It's been pre-identified, Margie. Okay. Article 7, meeting procedures. We reviewed the annual meeting agenda and we established two things that we thought were not specified. Establishment of a quorum and the President's report. I believe those were things that always are done anyway, but we simply solidified those as a part of the bylaws. So rules of order were not changed. We're continuing to use Robert's Rules of Order. Our newly revised is the authority for the conduct of the meetings. Bylaws amendments, again, we struck one sentence. It's covered in another part of the bylaws, and all amendments must be made by voting members. So all these bylaw changes, I'm not sure how we're going to handle these minor little English glitches, because you're going to be voting on something you've already received. Maybe there's a mechanism to just clean the spelling up in some cases and consider that as approved draft. We're not changing substance. But anyway, just to let you know, as you are going to vote on each and every one of these provisions and sections, you can vote for the whole thing if you like it, or you can vote on it section by section, and we will tabulate it section by section. So it is at least possible that some percentage of these resolutions will change, and some will be voted on positively, and some will not. It is, again, a 2/3 vote. So as a committee, we don't know what that will be. We will not be able to give you results at the annual meeting because this will require a considerable amount of tabulation. And in particular, there's a provision for you to abstain from voting for or against. So if you just simply want to make your vote counted as a part of your being a part of a required quorum, you can do that item by item, and it won't count as a vote against. So we have to have a 2/3 majority on each and every section that is outlined in your sample ballot.
I'm sure everybody is just amazed at the work you've done, and I just, since I'm always the one up asking questions, I want to be the one up exercising compliments. I think not only were you diligent, you were so creative. From simple things like moving the renewal date till December 31st, which just makes a whole lot more sense than September 30th, to some of the bigger things like the ability to elect people who had been appointed or replace them. I mean, it was very, very thoughtful, and I think you've done a terrific job. Thank you for your effort.
Oh, thank you so much, Joanne. Thank you so much.
And regarding the ability to change any language after it has been printed in both the state and county laws that I deal with, if the change is non-substantive, the result, pretty obvious result of a typo or so forth, that is allowed.
Thank you to our parliamentarian. He is also our English major, reviewing of language and unnecessary verbiage. So we've tried to be clear and concise. He literally had the job of reading it line by line. You missed a couple, Howard. But anyway, the group has been a wonderfully working group, and as Richard said, we appreciate all of the suggestions that came to us by email or by personal appearance at our meetings. We held at least 15 to 20 meetings over the course of the year. We literally have well over 1,000 people hours on the part of all the committee members, not just in the meetings, but often it required research and additional effort on one or more of our parts. So it has been a labor of love, and we're all committed to this church and the desire for us to be able to function effectively with minimal conflict and with clarity and transparency, and we hope that we've been able to achieve that with this result. So thank you so much.